Welcome to Creative Tien channel. Today we have an interesting project. We want to sew a pair of gloves. And there are many reasons to sew a pair of fabric gloves. And one obvious reason is the pandemic we are facing. It's hard to buy any gloves in the store. I'm not saying the gloves can prevent coronavirus. And it's not recommended to wear gloves to a supermarket because you can touch everything and there's a possibility of cross-contamination. But still there are times we need to use gloves to protect ourselves. And if we use it responsibly, try not to touch everything and not to touch your face when you have gloves on. It should be an extra protection, just like wearing masks. And some people might want to make their own custom gloves to match their costume, maybe for the Halloween time or special dress-up occasions. I'm going to show a very simple way with cut t-shirt fabric and just sew it with a straight line using my antique Singer 201 sewing machine. And one reason people are afraid to sew the t-shirt fabric is because it's stretchy, so a lot of home sewing machine cannot handle that. If you sew a lot of knit fabric or stretchy fabric, it's a good idea to invest in a serger or overlocker. But for most of us, it's not necessary. You just have to test it on your sewing machine and see if you have any problems sewing the knit fabric. For sewing the glove, the most stretchy part should be around the wrist. And you want it to stretchy left and right horizontally. So that's the layout of our glove pattern. And it's a good idea to reuse the hem in the bottom because this is a seam that's difficult for most sewing machine because we need it to be stretchy. And most commercial t-shirt has a finish. If you sew it on a regular home machine, maybe you can skip this part and leave the button not finished. So you don't have to worry about stretching too much and breaking the threads here. There are several types of gloves in the market, and one is a really stretchy one, and the other one is not stretchy. So you can see the size are very different. Both of them fits me. And you can see the small one is actually smaller than my hand, but because it's stretchy, it's going to fit. So for our pattern, it's somewhere between those two gloves. We are going to mark it with our hands. I cut the bottom part of the t-shirt in half just to make sure I have enough to make a pair. And I turned it inside out so you can see the wrong side is facing you. And we are going to draw the pattern directly on the fabric. And I will reuse the hem because a lot of home sewing machine cannot really sew the stretchy hem. Sometimes you can use a zig-zag stitch to achieve the same effect, but it's easier to reuse the hem or just leave it raw because the t-shirt fabric will not fray or unravel, so you don't have to finish it. And I'm just using the fabric marker, that's the disappearing ink. And I'll place my hand in the center. Depending on how big you want this part, you can move higher or lower. And I try to open up my finger wide. It doesn't have to be super wide, but when it's wider, it's easier to sew between the fingers. And the bottom part, I will just keep it straight. So you'll be perpendicular to the bottom line. When it's a right angle, it's much easier to sew. And then we just trace the outline. And then we will add the seam allowance after that. And I want to make sure this part is straight. And now we have the outline. I'm going to draw the seam allowance. You can decide how big you want for the seam allowance. If you want it tighter, you can have small seam allowance. And if you want it looser, have bigger seam allowance. I'm going to keep this part below the wrist about 1/2 inch. You can just eyeball it or measure 1/2 inch. And then for the finger, I will keep it 1/4 inch. For the other piece, you can do the same and trace your hand. It doesn't really have to be symmetrical because this fabric doesn't have front or back. It's the same color, so you can always turn the other way. If you use two different fabric, front and back, then it should be symmetrical, so it matches. Now I draft the pattern for the gloves. I'm just going to pin outside of the gloves because I try not to make holes inside the glove part. After we pin up from the outside, we are ready to sew. We just follow the seam allowance line and sew all the way. And then we can cut off extra fabric and flip it over. I'm going to start with this side because my pin is placed this way, so I can just pull the pin out this way. And I'm just going to use my straight stitch because I have an old Singer machine, so there's only straight stitch. And I will do some back stitch at the beginning and the end of the line. So and then go forward. And for the fingertip or the area that's hard to get, you can make the stitch length shorter, so it's smaller stitches, so it's more secure. For between the fingers, I can turn the direction and have a few stitches that's really small, maybe 2 stitches, and then turn again. So that's the between the fingers. You can see I have almost a U shape and use smaller stitches. And then back stitch at the end. And then you can try it on to see if it fits. If everything is okay, you can start to cut the fabric. And just leave maybe 1/8 of inch seam allowance. Keep it close to the line, and then we can turn over. When you are cutting out the fabric, make sure between the fingers you cut it close to the end, so when you turn it over, it doesn't bunch up. Now this one is cut, we just have to turn it inside out. So that's one glove done, and you just have to sew the other one. And you can see this one, that's the original seam from the t-shirt, so it has a nice finish and it can be stretched out easily. I hope you like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching and see you next week.